Love that point.
Yes. Uh, Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your attendance, taking the time whenever possible. It's always appreciated. Today is day 3 of our webinar series, Getting the Most Out of CoPilot and Hub. And day 3's focus of content will be on the hub itself. I'm one of the presenters for this webinar, Cody Henson. I'm a trainer consultant, along with fellow senior trainer and consultant, Rich Burfield, who will be helping to answer questions, clarify things, and just help keep us moving along. So, as this is a webinar, the best way to communicate is using the chat or the Q&A. Q&A has been very active in the previous 2 webinars, so we'd love to see that trend continue. Your interaction and questions are always appreciated. So I'm going to begin sharing the hub screen. So I'm going to back out of this. So in our hub, similar to our CoPilot, we have an expandable menu in the top left corner. And we're going to begin by navigating that. And we're going to go through the settings, the process monitoring, and the process development. So looking at our settings, this tab will be a page that you will use on occasion. Specifically, at the top here, it gives you a quick display, the status, everything is good. Reporting from this hub. Scrolling down, it gives you some information about which software version you might be on, hardware version you might be on. Scrolling back up is a tab for updates, to where we can get an idea of the current software that we are running. There are some quick actions here: current software, release channel, update system software. And those just quickly scroll you down on this page to that section where that information is relevant. So in the release channels, if I look at the right, I see I have a green active. That tells me that I'm on a general release. Just noting this because if you are on a validated version, right, that would have an active symbol there just to indicate that you are on the validated version of the CoPilot software. You do have an option to seek updates automatically, and you can check that if that's something you're interested in doing. So while we're talking about updates, and again, I'm still in the settings. If I go right down to devices. Oh, and look, I need to make sure that I am logged in. So going down to devices, this tells me all of the copilots that are connected to this hub. And just for reference, I am dialed in remotely to the hub in TC at our headquarters. So this is the actual hub in Traverse City that all of the lab machines are connected to. So I can see if there are issues, if they are connected, not connected. You have a filter option to the far right of these 3 icons, where you can look at it in different ways or pull up different pieces of information if you were interested in looking at it through that lens. And this is also the spot where you can seek and push updates out to any copilots that are on the floor. So for example, selecting updates, select the devices. If I just, and you can pick multiples here to check for updates. And again, this is not updating the copilot. This is pushing the update to the copilot. If I click update, that tells me this first one is on the current version, or its current version is 10.3. The new version is also 10.3. Bottom one is on an older version that I could push an update out to. So not going to do that at this moment, but that is an option that I have available. So from devices, because I'm not gonna quite go in order here. So I'm gonna go back up to preferences. And this is where if you wanted to force everything to display in a specific value, you could do that. If you do not want to force a specific value, say for imported data, right, that you could force it to change the units here. If you're okay with whatever units the data was collected in, then you can leave the selection on any. Below that, we have custom fields. And these are, there's no defined use for this, right? It is truly a custom field. Maybe you want to associate a customer name with this. You want to associate a batch run number with this. Whatever custom field you may want to associate with a job run, you can do that here and define that field. So the next two tabs are users and roles. But I would like.
Can I jump there quick? Yeah, so we did have a question come in on that about the updates. How often would we have to check for updates? And do we have to push them manually every time?
Checking for updates, I will have to look to see if we have a clear roadmap for when we push out, because there, it could be a small patch or a feature update, and I don't know the exact frequency that those are released. I know it's a couple times a year.
Yeah, and I believe it's also in our newsletter, and if I'm not mistaken, they also get emails of a new update if needed.
Okay. And then the other answer to that is yes, this is the current function is going to be to load the update into the hub and then push the updates from the hub to the copilot. And then at your copilot, you will get a notification that there is an update available. And once the job is stopped, if you choose to stop it, then you can update the copilot. So not wanting to interrupt running jobs to force an update is the thought of pushing them out from the hub and then updating them on the floor as opportunity arises. If you have a large number of copilots that need an update, we would recommend that you probably just download, push them to your copilots 3 or 4 at a time. It can be a large amount of data and it's all coming from the same location. So pushing too many out can kind of bog things down and can cause some of the copilots to give a timeout alarm. So if we can keep it to just pushing out 2 to 3 at a time, or 3 to 4 at a time, we can typically avoid that timeout alarm. And I really should have said it at the beginning, but fundamentally the hub, is ultimately a server. It is where all of the data from the copilot lives when the job is stopped. So your CoPilot can store its data for up to about 2 weeks, but there's a certain limit of data that it can store. So it can store up to 2 weeks of data as long as it doesn't hit that threshold. And that is why the hub or the server is an integral part of the system. So that way we can access and retrieve that data once that job is no longer running. So if the job is running, you can get a lot of the information from the CoPilot. Once the job is not running, that is where we need to come to the hub to view any sort of information that we're going to look for.
Okay, thanks, Cody.
Thank you. So we have users and roles, but I want to start with roles first. So inside roles, we have predetermined roles that are defined, and then you can create custom roles within that if you so choose. So you can look at the primary roles that are supplied, and if you select one, you can start to see what permissions that role has or does not have. And it is follows this same quick launch links. What roles do they have for global, for hub, and for CoPilot? This is just kind of viewing the roles. And even with an admin, data storage, data retention is very important. So even as an admin, the delete is not something that is readily available once the data is collected. Now, if these roles don't fit your user base, then you can come to create a custom role, and you will need to define that role. We'll just call it Cody, and then select a base role to build upon. So you could select, right, system admin, and then just take away which specific functions you wanted to. You could do that with any base role and make that a custom role that you want to assign. So, and the assignment of roles is what plays into the user tab. So within the software, you can create individual users. So we can start to track and log changes and who may have been making adjustments or logging in to the CoPilot during that time frame. So it gives you a list of active users. And depending on what level you are logged in at, you may have the ability to edit. If you're not, logged in as an admin role, you may not have that ability to edit. And here's where you will create your individual users. So if you want to create, maybe your processing techs have one level and your setup techs have a different level, or reversed, right? Access, quality checking may just need to be viewing things. You can create individual user roles to document any events that user may have triggered. So, filling out first name, last name, giving them a username, or auto-generating. And within the roles, right, you could assign a custom role that you created, or you can select one of the predetermined roles, or you can select multiple roles. So if you just want to make sure that this, if you're the power user, you're the owner of, a lot of this, then you may want a role that just, encompasses every single thing that is available. So you can select multiple roles. This also allows you, as people build their skills and maybe change jobs within your organization, you can continually add them additional options that they can edit or view within the system. That is our settings tab. That was our settings. So I'm going to go into process monitoring now, which is often where this loads into. And this is kind of your heads up display of your shop floor. Right now, not a lot going on at the shop floor currently in this moment. No classes are running, so the machines are all down, and maybe 2 of the machines are down and the jobs have not been stopped yet. Again, haven't ran much in the last, I think 24 hours for this card. So not a lot of data to display here. But you could think of this as kind of your morning meeting, your huddle, looking at your machine status. Where are my issues? And so that I can populate some of this data, I'm going to change the time frame from yesterday. I'm just going to go back to last month. So I can generate some data down below. If you're coming in, you may just be interested in how things were running in the shift before you for the last 8 hours, during your shift the last hour. Just so I can show us some data, I'm going to select the last month. Then we can start to see some top 5s. Top 5 machines that generated the most cycles. Top 5 machines that generated the greatest number of reject cycles. Continuing to scroll down. Any machines that had alarms, templates, maybe a Master Molder 2 class, which machines generated the most alarms. This screen would be very useful, in a production setting, so you could understand maybe how many parts were rejected, potential restarts that occurred. If you had warnings activated, this is where you would see the most warnings. Continuing with the top 5 machines that generated the longest downtime, the longest run time. You can go in deeper to these. So each of these have an informational tab. And when I click there, it quickly brings me to the reports tab. So let me go back to the dashboard and can go back to the last month and just finish up this page. And then we'll look at that report tab and the other tabs. Template match, if we had machines that were out of match, this is going to be for Master Molder 2 classes that trying to generate a template and match it on another machine. And within, for the template, was it the machine conditions that were out of match? Were it the material conditions, which we know is a measurement of effective viscosity? Or was it the mold, pressure sensors that were out of match? So this is really your bird's eye view at the shop floor and whatever machines, whatever copilots you have that are connected to a hub. Now you can look at this, from the dashboard view, as we just did. You can look at this from the machines that you have connected. So, looking at that dashboard, the machine status, going to machines just kind of gives you a more in-depth look at any information that you may, or any machines that are down, stopped, and specifically when they were stopped, ended, or went down. If they went down in an alarm state. We have a couple tabs up here. We have a filter tab. So if there's additional metrics that you want to look at, you could add good cycles, a reject percentage. You can fill the data as much as you would like.
Hey, Cody, Richard's asking, is this similar to the analyzer?
Yes. Yeah. So your EDM is your hub, and then the reports is kind of what I would say is the analyzer. If you think that's fair, Rich.
I agree.
A couple other buttons here. You have this little plug that's disconnected. So this is kind of extreme here, but many machines have come and gone from the lab facility in TC. So in an effort to not muddy the screen up too much, you can hide any disconnected machines. We also have a molds, so you can look at it via molds. You can also add with the filter whatever additional pieces of data you might want to look at it by. And lots of molds created under lots of different names for all of the classes that have been ran. But this would be a good heads up view of the molds that you have in your facility. So again, clicking on this jumps me into some information where I could generate a multi-job report. So there was a question about if notes correlate across multiple runs. Now I can select, a run from the Nisi and a run from the Toyo and a run from a Millicron. And I can generate a report. But I didn't run that data, so I can't say for certain if there are notes present to tell if they correlate. I am going to bring a job up that I did run with some notes. I'm kind of jumping ahead for that question, so no notes for that data. But this is in our reports page. So you can get to it looking through molds. You could get to it looking through machines. And it takes us to our last page in the dashboard. And arguably, if you're seeking cycle data, this is the page that you're likely to find yourself in. So I can look at reports linked to the dashboard by machine. But if you want to pull a report for a job that was previously ran, right? Maybe you want to understand what went wrong that day or what went right. You can narrow down your search field. So I'm going to pull a report from October 9th. And it was on the Nisi with the ice scraper. And now I've pulled this report into my hub, and I can start looking through the data in more details. Starts with a job overview, just downtime, cycles. This run was not with a template, but if I had any custom fields or alarms that were triggered, it would show me here. I will pick one that has some of these events shortly. But we've got a few tabs across the top. So we've got a quality tab. And this is where if you had a part associated with your process, then you could use the correlation tool to run a study and try to derive a correlation. This is where that data would lie. If you had created the part, defined the key characteristics that you want to measure, and then done the measurements and inputted them in. So I'm going to get into that more when we go to the process development tab. But this is where that data would lie if you had done that legwork building that information into the hub. You've got an audit tab, which is just a quick heads up view of any alarm conditions that may have occurred during that run. There were no alarms defined for this run. As I scroll down, we can see that there were notes attached. So in this run, there was a note made. They were running, it was a study that was running a 22 melt, and then developed a process, did a running change to a 44 melt, right? So much easier to push, and then did a running change back. That was using a D3 process, V to P on the post gate. And then this note here in the center, we made a change from controlling at the post gate to controlling at the end of cavity, and ran a similar study, 22 melt, running change to 44, back to 22. And then what if anything did we have to change to match the template when we changed the trigger? The statistics page, you can select what statistic and what range of cycles you want to derive the statistics from. And there is a whole range of statistics that you could derive from the data. And just a note, this data was not ran on a machine in Traverse City. This data was ran on a machine in our Alabama facility and then sent to the Traverse City hub so that way we could view it and display it. So just an example of how you can send data across, export from one hub and import to another. And then we come to the trends page, which is arguably the most valuable section of the reports, specifically when you're wanting to look at and compare cycles. So we start by populating a summary graph. And if you notice, when I scroll down, the cycle graph is blank. So the cycle graph will remain blank until I lay my cursor down, and that action selects a cycle that is displayed in our cycle graph. And this cycle graph functions just in many ways like your CoPilot. You have the quick action of showing overlays, which I will display, options for triggers, and then you can expand your curves, select and isolate. You can add remove, and you can play with loading a template if you chose. So looking back up at the summary graph, above it, we do have notes. So this will show you what notes were logged for this job. And if I click, it will select and take me to that note. So that selects the cycle that's displayed. And you can do a couple things with this here. You can, on the summary graph, click the overlay button. It will capture that cycle. And then if you come to the summary graph, you can manually click forward or back and start to look at cycle after cycle. So before I do that, I'm going to pull this quick tab out, and I'm also going to show overlays. So as I click through these cycles, it will overlay each cycle on top of one another. And you'll see, as this was a forced change in material, you can see that the lines are getting thicker, indicating that the machine is having to compensate and adjust for some change in viscosity.
Hey, Cody, we had a question from Jonathan, and I did answer him, but he was assuming if a press was currently running that he could see the current cycle graph. And the answer to that is yes, you could see that current cycle, correct?
Yes, I cannot display that, unfortunately, at the moment because none of the machines are currently running.
Right.
But if they were, then yes, I would be able to display it in real time.
Yep. Okay, correct. Thank you.
Thank you. So I had overlays on just to try to show you the change, how well the process absorbed the material shift that we forced upon it. If I remove overlays, because I still have this icon selected, and on the summary graph, you can say I now have a green line here. So I still have that one cycle overlaid against this cycle, right? To try to illustrate, get rid of the thicker lines and just show that snapshot of that melt compared to the snapshot of this melt. And you will be viewing your hub with a keyboard and mouse. So this is a time where you will need to select this time range. Right? You won't have the option of touchscreen most likely. And then you can zoom in to your cycle just like you would and start to see some differences in how the machine must have went to a lower melt flow, right? As it used less pressure as we change the melt. You can still isolate curves. It functions very much like your CoPilot. Done on your time frame or zooming back out to see the entire time. So that is an example of pulling some data out that you might want to retrieve. If you are looking at your data, you go back. If I'm on my dashboard to kind of try to answer that question as best we could about viewing your data. But you could say, hey, the machine that generated the most alarms, let's look at that report. Let's look at the trends. And maybe some of these alarms don't make sense and you need some help with customer support. So these 3 dots is an opportunity to export this data to a file that you could share, and we could analyze at a different location. By default, it will select the entire run. You can choose, I think this was one of the questions, do you export it as a CSV where it's slightly editable, or just as a job data zip? We typically ask for the job data whenever possible as a zip, just because it includes everything. And then you can, so when you select job data zip, your options below it disappear because it pulls all of the data that's associated with it. If you just select the summary data CSV, then you need to decide, do you want any quality measurements included? And then do you want specific trends, or do you want all available trends? Right. So this job looks like they had alarms, and I can see peak pressure end of cavity 6. There's a band around it. Lots of times where they were below and above or riding right in the line. This is somebody doing process development. You can see there's a cycle there where it looks like things went the way they wanted them to. Pull the data down. Very zoomed in, or zoomed out, I should say. Just ways you can look at still utilizing that summary graph for potential changes in the process. And even within the summary graph, if there is data in here that you are missing, right, you can still add and remove data from that selection. You can look at it, things that triggered or defined them. But as you may know, there is nowhere to change an alarm setting once that data has been ran. That was one of the questions that had come up. So usually loads on the dashboard, just your heads up view. You can look at it by the machines you have connected, by the molds you have in the database. You'll, in my opinion, most often be looking at reports, either all the reports that have been logged in from all of your copilots, or seeking out specific run dates to analyze the data. Once you select it, a lot of the valuable information lies in the trends, where we can see where changes were made, indicated by blue dots. Red dots indicate alarm conditions, but you can look at trends and changes in values. So that takes us to the process development. And I'm going to start this one kind of out of order also. So this is a useful database, but like all databases, it is as useful as the data that we supply it. So the more information and the more data that we're willing to supply it, the more we can utilize the functions of this database. So I would recommend, if you are going to begin building your database, to start with materials. and build a material library. Because as you start to build a part or launch a new mold, it's going to ask you to select some material to associate it with. So it is recommended to do that work up front. If I select a common material that we use, this is a perfect example. Somebody was highly detailed oriented, did a great job of entering the information here. You can see we've got color, grades, we've got tonnage factor, lots of useful information. You also can build a machine library. And one of the questions came up with, can the hub or can the system help recommend this is a good place to run? This might not be a great place to run this mold. And this is where the quality of the data that you input here will help you utilize the system for that function. So you can create a new machine. And there's a lot of information that you can enter. Some of it is required with a hard red, and some of it is optional yellow. But understand that if we don't fill out all of the yellow, there are certain assumptions that the hub will not be able to make if we don't provide that data. And I'll show that as we go on a little bit. So it takes a little bit of time to build your machine library, but once it's done, it's built, and you can utilize it from there. So if I just click on this 22A, right, we've lots, this looks good, right? Quite a bit of information there. Tells us where the knockout pattern is. This looks good. Right? Or if I pick the one below it, this one doesn't look so great, right? And it's just an example how, it has the screw diameter, so that's cool, but how much effort we put into this is how much value it's going to generate for us. So then just wanted to touch on materials and machines, because to me, it makes sense to build these first before we look at any of the workflows. So one of the differences in the hub compared to the CoPilot is you can create, you can create a machine. You can get everything going from the CoPilot. And there's one option on there that is not required. So I'm going to jump back to a CoPilot. And if I pull down the top menu here, all right, we see we have a current job, has a machine, has a mold, but does not have a part, right? And it has a process. So to build a part, that needs to be done from the hub. And to run a correlation, have to have a part. So to have some sort of correlation, you have to have a part associated with that, so we can tie those quality measurements to and the key characteristics we want to capture. So for example, if I launch a new mold, right, I'm going to choose one of these workflows on the dashboard. I'm going to launch a new mold. Now we start to see the difference from a CoPilot, right? You have to choose a part. That is one of the differences between creating this on the hub or creating something on the CoPilot. On the hub, we need to make a part. And if you create everything on the CoPilot and you want to run quality correlations, you still need to create a part that's associated with that. So I've chosen the workflow to launch a new mold. I need to choose a part. I'll pick the demo part. I need to pick a part variant if one exists. Right, you could have multiple inserts, maybe different colors. And I need to choose a mold, right? So that way we can think about sensors, stuff like that. For this example, I'm just going to randomly choose one. And then I get a warning saying, you know, some of the following information may result in incorrect machine recommendations. Something's missing in the mold data that may not, you know, it may give me a false sense that something will fit. I need to look at the mold data to see what, but it's kind of that good data in, good data out. The better we can define our molds, filling in all the optional and required information with mold, machine, that's where this tool is going to come in and say, hey, yeah, the mold will fit in this Toshiba and the injection unit be good. Doesn't look like the clamp information was added, so it can't speak to that. But this is that capable machine. If I just pick one, I could generate a setup sheet. And depending on what is or is not in the database available to me is how well, you know, it's going to generate a process. I need to provide a name for the new process and define, is this the master process? And the master process is, you know, like what it will reference cycle time to. It's the master process for reference. So that is how you could launch a new mold from the hub. I'm gonna go back up. If you have information from another facility at a different location that has ran a mold and they exported their data, you can import your hub data here. Choose a file, browse your system, and then once it's done uploading, it will take you to the reports for that piece of data. You have the option of transferring a mold. So if I said, let's see about the hollow scraper. I don't have to have a part. Okay? So I can just go to process, choose the process that's associated with it. Oh, it's saying, hey, you might be missing some data here. So I'll still just pick I'll pick this first one. And as long as I had a setup sheet in the system, right, it would attempt to generate a new setup sheet for the new system, the new machine, the new target machine, and kind of save us some of that math and energy and trying to do the calculations and move it over. Let's go to dashboard. If you had created a part, you can start a correlation study from here. Here you need to choose a mold and a process. And then you can make a decision on the samples. And depending on which variables and cavities you're trying to look at, you can pick correlation data from a specific cavity. And this is information that we have to decide what's valuable, right? So this says cavity fill time 1. That might, for you, be SBC 0.1, right? Where then your weight is a type of measurement, a different type of measurement other than weight, right? And you can measure length, width, just about any measurement that you could think of. We have an option or a way of logging that well beyond weight, whatever information is critical to your part. Once you choose the summary variables, it will compare, how did peak pressure at end of cavity 1 correlate with a variable that you're looking for, a dimensional change. Another question that we had was potentially migrating from eDart. That's another workflow in our dashboard where you could import your eDart configurations. I don't have any currently on me to import to illustrate, but this is the workflow that you would use to migrate your eDart data to your CoPilot hub system. And then didn't really talk about these, but these workflows launch you in and out of these tabs. So you could, instead of choosing a workflow, go into part, and you could create a part from here, right? Define the part, and in this area, right, once you've named and labeled the part, I think once I create a part is where I can go in and log any quality measurements against that part that I might be interested in. I don't want to create any additional parts right now, though. So you can look at parts that were created, or you can create new parts. The part sample gives you a view of the samples that have been taken. The other workflow kind of refers to what, defining, is this going to be a QC sample? Is this what kind of sample is it going to be? And then the part sample is where you can look at samples that were ran, whether the measurements were completed. We have a molds tab where we can create a new mold, or we can look at existing molds and how much information they do or do not have. And then your processes. This is the last tab two more tabs to discuss. Universal processes, how you can take one process information from one machine, and you can target, view setup sheets, cycle templates, any information that was stored and captured. Right. This also comes back to how well you document the setup, is how well, we're going to be able to recreate that, or maybe the next person will be able to recreate the part we were trying to make. So this is the database where the setup sheets live. So that was a kind of a high level view of the hub. That brings us right about to the end of the webinar here. Okay, see a question there. No problem. Yes. So we did play around and we showed how you can look at alarms on the audit page, but you are unable. Let me get back in here. You could go to a machine that had ran, and you can look at the audit page, for example, and see what were the starting alarms, what were the ending alarms, what alarms may have been triggered, any notes that were in there. But this is just an audit, right? You don't have the ability to change what had happened in the past or to modify that data. Can we go back? Yes, I believe this webinar, once the recording's finalized and polished, will be sent. A link will be sent via email to anybody that signed up or any portion that you may have missed.
That is correct.
Yeah, shoot, go ahead. Ask about something other than the hub. Yeah.
No, not me. I just said, yeah, we would be able to go back and view it. Oh,
Yeah. Somebody said they have a question other than the hub.
yeah. Robert. I'd be typing.
All good. Don't forget, you can always email Rich with any additional questions.
That is correct. My email is cody.henson@rjginc.com.
Perfect.
Are you seeing the questions, Cody?
No, I didn't scroll down. No, I didn't.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Let's see here. David wants to know if they find what they find there is when they set up a job, they often need to create or update alarms before production starts running. So are our alarms, that's a good question because I'm not sure if our alarms, when we save a template, do the alarms stay with that or do we have to do that every time?
No, the alarms stay with it. I'm just trying to think about that before. Typically, and maybe just thinking about my experience, what we find here is when we set up a job, we often need to create or update alarms before production starts running. So, and I guess most of that's done during process development. So I'm trying to think of an example of getting into the hub, because some of the changes, right, done remotely from a hub aren't things that they aren't changes that we would want made remotely without a person there to verify things. Right. For example, if somebody changes the upper limit on a cavity pressure, right, and could potentially flash a tool out, that's typically not something that we would recommend doing remotely. So I think that's why you're slightly limited on changing alarms from the hub. If that makes sense. I used a lot of words there.
Yeah, that made sense. Hope that answers this question. We got another question there. Robert or Bob. he had asked, with their shot size at 9 and a transfer at 0.54, 15,990 of the transfer pressure to fill time of 0.31. Is that shot so small he's having trouble seeing the sensor PSI at the end of fill?
Yeah,
Cody?
that's something. Yeah, I was kind of reading it. That's, I think, something that we would need to take offline and possibly get customer service involved to understand sensor type, location, pin diameter, if there's any contour or angle to the pin. It's definitely something that we can help try to troubleshoot, just not necessarily in this format.
Right.
I see David also responded. I
Yep.
am going to put my email down here.
Jason.robinson@rjjinc.com.
So, David, if you wouldn't mind, maybe jotting me an email so I can, because I understand what you're saying, right? You after qualifications, and maybe you're wanting to even tighten the alarms a little bit from where you initially set them, which makes sense. So if you wouldn't mind sending me an email, and then maybe I can dig into a little bit deeper and give you a better answer there. I think we've hit the end of our time, Rich. I really do greatly want to thank everybody that could attend. Even if you couldn't attend, viewing the recording, the interaction from this webinar was unbelievably fantastic. Much appreciated. Made it a much better experience, and I hope everybody took at least something away from it.
I agree with you 100%. A lot of interaction this time.
So thank you all very much, and look forward to you on future sessions.
All right. Bye-bye, y'all.